Podcasts on UNCTV.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
North Carolina Book Watch kicks off its new season this weekend as D.G. Martin sits down with author Michael Parker. Mr. Parker's new book combines two stories of love and loss along the North Carolina coast. Here's a sneak peek into the watery part of the world.
As far as historical fiction is concerned, I'm going to call it modern, it's close to being modern, part of it is also based on a few historical facts.
Right.
And so tell us the facts that inspired you to write this story about the three people, the last residents of an island that used to be populated with a strong working town.
Really, that's all I knew. I mean, that's all I knew.
Well, you tell us about the island, what in the time period.
Well, I
that
can
you
tell you
remember.
about. I can tell you that it's based on Portsmouth Island, which I never mention in the book because I don't want people to say, "Oh, Portsmouth Island is not like that. The church is over here, and the post office is over here, and those three people."
It's not Portsmouth Island, but it's inspired by.
It's inspired by
and
Portsmouth.
What was the real Portsmouth Island story as you remember it?
As I remember it, you know, there were three people left because of all the storms, and those three people were two elderly white women who were not sisters. I made them sisters in the novel, and an older black man who actually, in fact, took care of them. And there was still, you know, even after all these years, and just three people left on the island, a kind of racial hierarchy, right, obviously, so that he was subservient to these women, as I understood it, as the story was told to me. But, you know, as a novelist, you hear these things and you don't want to ask too many questions. I mean, I'm not...
You didn't want to be bound up by the real story. You wanted to be unleashed by that story.
I want to make... my job is to make stuff up. So I didn't, you know, pry. I didn't prod. I didn't say, well, what was this man like and what was their relationship like? And I'm sure that, you know, my version of it is wildly different from whatever happened.
Well, I think maybe the most interesting part of your book are these characters, these three characters. There are other characters who are also interesting. But since we've just got a limited amount of time, I want you, if you will, to just give us a character sketch of these three people who are the last fictional survivors in this fictional island off the North Carolina coast.
Okay. As I said, they're two sisters. The younger one is named Maggie, and she's a bit of a romantic and a bit of a mess. You know, I mean, she falls for this guy, a fisherman who comes over, who's 15, 20 years younger than her, and this happens early on in the novel. He really wants her to leave the island because he feels that she's so bound by the conventions of living there, and by the stricture of living with her older sister, and by the past, that they would never be able to fully, you know, have a good relationship if they stayed on an island. So he wants her to go off island, and finally she can't. She stays.
She is so fascinating for many reasons. One of which is she's, say, 40. This young man's closer to 20 than that, and yet she's still the little girl. She's still, as he said, help me if I get this wrong, but when he first meets her, he says, "I hear you're hot," or something along those lines.
Yeah. Wild, I think.
Wild, and so she still has this. She's, you know, living in a very small town on an island, but she's got some raging hormones that still, at 40, are still guiding her life.
Yeah, I don't think that's unlikely. That doesn't seem unlikely, you know. I mean, people keep on doing what they're doing until they can't anymore. But she definitely is quite randy and has a reputation on the island. Her older sister is the complete opposite. She's very buttoned down. She's very she feels that it is her job in life to perpetuate what she feels is the truth of the island, which is just as much myth, obviously, as anyone else's version of the island, but to her...
She's the local keeper of history and myth of this place.
The local historian, yeah. I mean, she's interested in preserving the kind of facts about the Outer Banks, which we know about the accent, you know, about the recipes and the kind of stories of survival that we've all read and that have been cataloged by oral historians.
Now, are you sort of making fun of the Outer Bankers who are attached to their myths and their history?
No, not at all. I don't think I'm making fun of anyone, but if I am, I'm making fun of myself in a sense, you know, as an author who's coming in there and trying to understand the culture that is many cultures. Right, and trying to consolidate the whole history of the Outer Banks into this one story that fits neatly into my understanding of what history is. That's what the book finally is about, that everyone on that island has a story that they're not telling because they're not allowed to tell it.
Wow. Well, I want to talk some more about both of these women, but another interesting and very hard to get into character in your book is Woodrow, who's the African-American the third last survivor of this living on this island, who's a complicated person, in the relationship among those three people is kind of complicated. Yeah. Tell us about Woodrow.
Well, Woodrow, I think, is really, in some sense, the most developed character. I'm not sure what you mean by harder to get into.
Well, maybe it's because he's the most developed, but he's subtly most developed. Right, and it's maybe on the first reading you don't pick up on every piece of Woodrow. I'm not criticizing you.
No. You can criticize me. It's your, it's your show. I think he's, you know, part of it is the language that I found to tell his story, which is, you know, the syntax is and the idiom.
Just tell us who he is and describe him for us.
I'm trying to.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
He's older. He's a fisherman. He has 11 children. He was married to this woman named Sarah who lost her life in a hurricane. And that's really, that happens early on in the book. And the rest of the book, he's so bereaved and mourning for her, I think, and it affects his relationships with the island. But yet he doesn't want to leave the island necessarily because he's so wedded to what it was when they were there. And she wanted him to leave the island, and he did for long periods of time. But he kept coming back because that was the place that he knew.
You can see all of DG's conversation with author Michael Parker on the season premiere of North Carolina BookWatch tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. and again on Sunday at 5.
Podcasts on UNC-TV.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.